So I want you to imagine a kid heading to the school cafeteria and realizing that they can't afford lunch. For some people, this might sound like a pretty small problem, but after all, it's just lunch, right? But for millions of American families in need, school lunch is a critical lifeline. And that's not being able to afford it means that their children might go hungry for the whole day. So school lunches have become a hot button issue here in the United States as debates on whether or not they should be universally free kind of rage on. It seems like a simple question. Should every child be guaranteed a meal at school? The answer, as with most American issues, is much more complicated than it appears. Today, we're going to dive deep into the idea of school lunches and why they're not always free in the United States. We're going to explore both sides of the argument like we always do, understanding the economic and political stakes of this issue. We're also going to look at why some states are now scrambling to address this issue. So to understand why school lunches aren't free everywhere in the United States, we have to look back at how we got here. School lunch programs in the United States date back to the 1930s during the Great Depression. The federal government started providing food aid to schools as a way to combat widespread child hunger and support struggling farmers. It was an economic solution to a very real problem. Millions of children were malnourished, and American farmers had too much food that they couldn't sell. A federal school lunch program started in 1946 helped solve both of these problems. The National School Lunch Act of 1946 was a landmark piece of legislation, setting up a system where the federal government would reimburse schools for providing lunches to low-income students. But check this out. Here's the thing. The program wasn't intended to be a means-tested program. What that means is that the families who qualified based on income would receive free or reduced cost lunches. This idea is very, very simple. Help those in need, but only those in need. Now, if we fast forward to today, we still have this tiered system. Some students get free lunch, some get a reduced cost lunch, others pay full price. But as time changes, so does the conversation around whether this system is still fair or even effective. Let's start with the argument for why school lunches should be universally free. First and foremost, advocates for free lunches argue that no child should ever have to go hungry, period. Over 11 million children in the United States live in food insecure households, meaning that their families don't consistently have enough food to eat. For many of these kids, the meal that they get at school is the most nutritious and sometimes the only meal that they get every single day. For advocates of free lunch programs, the issue is simple. If we know that hunger negatively affects learning, mental health, and development, why shouldn't we just guarantee that every child gets fed at school? Now, numerous studies have shown that kids who are hungry don't learn as well. They have trouble concentrating, they perform worse on tests, and they're more likely to act out in class. Providing free lunches for students could help level the playing field, giving every child, regardless of family income, the same opportunity to succeed academically. Now, in fact, some schools have implemented universal free lunch programs, and they've seen noticeable improvements in student performance, behavior, and attendance. Feeding kids, in other words, doesn't just help them physically, it helps them learn. Another issue with the current system is that it can create a stigma for kids who receive free or reduced price lunches. Even though the system is confidential, kids often know who qualifies for free lunch and who doesn't. So for example, some students, they can end up being embarrassed, or they can be bullied, or they can feel shameful. This makes them less likely to take advantage of this program, even when they qualify. So proponents of universal free lunch argue that making meals free for everyone eliminates this problem entirely. If lunch is free for everyone, no one is singled out, and all the kids are on equal footing. Now finally, there's the question of that word, bureaucracy. The current system requires schools to verify family income, track down payments, handle massive amounts of paperwork to the kids who qualify for the program, and to see who qualifies for what. Free lunch for everyone saves time, money, and it simplifies this. It eliminates the need for schools to track the students who owe lunch money, handle the dreaded lunch debt, a term that sounds ridiculous when we're talking about children, but it's a real problem that I'm going to touch on later. On the other side of the debate are those people who argue that universal free lunch programs aren't as straightforward or as necessary as they seem. The biggest argument against free lunches for all students is the cost. Providing free meals to every child in America would be a massive expense, and it's estimated over $22 billion per year. Critics argue that this money could be better spent on other educational priorities, like improving curriculums, raising teachers' salary, funding after-school programs, or building massive football stadiums like we have here in Texas. Opponents of universal free lunch programs often argue that taxpayer dollars should be used efficiently and that families who can afford to pay for their children's meals should continue to do so. Why should middle or upper class families benefit from a free lunch program when they're fully capable of paying for themselves, right? This brings us to the second argument, the belief that government assistance should be targeted, not universal. It's a cornerstone of the American way. Opponents of free lunch argue that aid should go to those who need it the most, low-income families, rather than just creating a one-size-fits-all solution. In America, that's what we view as socialism, and that stinks in our nose. Many tested programs, like the National School Lunch Program, they argue, are more efficient because they direct resources to families that truly need them. This expands the program to include all students regardless of income, might end up diluting its impact and increase overall cost without necessarily solving the root problems of food insecurity. Now, some critics see universal free lunch programs as just another example of government overreach. They argue that it's not the government's role to provide every child with a meal and that doing so creates more dependency on federal programs. They argue that the government should focus on empowering families to improve their financial situation rather than expanding social safety nets. You know, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It's your own fault you're poor. So why has this issue become such a problem in political America? The debate over school lunches touches on a deeper ideological difference about the role of government, taxation, and socialism. Progressives generally support universal programs, arguing that they create equality of opportunity, and they address systematic inequalities, while conservatives tend to favor targeted assistance, fiscal responsibility, limited government intervention, and blaming the poor for their own situation, though they deny that. Over the last few years, the issue has become particularly heated as many states have started introducing legislation to make school lunches free for all. Now, during COVID-19, the federal government temporarily expanded free school lunch meals to all students nationwide. For 2 years, kids didn't have to worry about paying for lunch, but that program ended in 2022, throwing this issue back into the spotlight. Now, since then, states like Colorado, California, and Maine have passed their own laws to keep free meals in place for all students, while other states like, guess, Texas and Florida, have resisted such efforts, arguing that the cost is too high and that it's not a priority. Now, I want to remind you that Texas is leading the charge to privatize public education, or privatize education, which is just a whole nother thing. Side note. So meanwhile, While school districts across the country have continued to deal with this issue of school lunch debt, where students who can't afford to pay for lunch are still served food, but their families rack up debt, that can sometimes lead to even more embarrassment or collection agencies getting involved. And nobody likes to deal with a bill collector. So where does that leave us? So the future of the school lunch policy in America is really uncertain. The debate over whether school lunches should be free for all students, it's not going away anytime soon. As people grapple with this issue, we're likely going to see more states introduce free lunch programs while other states resist. Red and blue state issue. Yeah, back to that again. What's clear here is that this issue is more than just about food. It's about what kind of society we want to live in, whether we believe every child should be guaranteed a meal, regardless of their background, or whether we think the responsibility lies elsewhere. Now, understanding both sides of this debate, even though I'm kind of sarcastic about it, is crucial because it speaks to the larger issues about poverty, education, and the role of government in America. 50 little countries, not one united nation, right? But anyway, whether the school lunch program should be free for all kids might seem like a small question, but the implications go far beyond the cafeteria, okay? So in conclusion, school lunches might seem like a mundane part of everyday life, but for millions of kids, it's a whole lot more than that. It's about food security, equal access to education, and fairness. While both sides of the debate have very, very, very valid points, whether it's the cost of such programs or the need to end childhood hunger, finding a solution is something that the country can't afford to overlook. As more states take action and the federal government rethinks its role in this, one thing is really clear. Lunch is never just about lunch. It's about who we are as a society and what we prioritize. In the end, the debate over school lunches is a reflection of the broader challenges facing America today. Aren't they all? I'm Matt Pierce. Thanks for joining me in the video. We'll see you next time.